Okay, we're going to be looking at the three main areas of the economy which are in trouble, specifically what economists call disequilibrium, which is a function of price, quantity supplied, and quantity demanded. Okay, and the problem all three of them had was what's informally known as surplus. All right, basically in agriculture, you've got too many farmers producing too many crops. And how can there be too many? Well, there will be downward pressure on prices, and in unregulated agriculture markets, that will absolutely happen. There are things that might get in the way in the other two, not that one. So, as the price naturally falls toward equilibrium, it's going to drop below the minimum level necessary for all these farmers to remain profitable, and a whole bunch of them are just going to quit. That doesn't solve the problem, as we're going to see, because somebody else gets the land and keeps it in production. Okay, farmers were in a depression. They'd already been in a depression for several years when the stock market crash took out the rest of the economy. The farmers' problem started back during World War One. Now, farming had always been something of a rough ride, with large and unpredictable swings in prices, and a few good years and a few bad years. But World War One, during that war, farm prices were at an unimaginable all-time high. We're trying to feed a 4 million man army, plus our population, plus European populations, because our allies said back in a time when farm work was labor intensive, their farm labor forces were depleted by the war. They had all these, the men were out in the trenches getting shot at. And we're also helping feed their armies. So farmers could sell all they could raise at higher prices than they'd ever dreamed of. So the temptation many succumbed to was to borrow money, go into debt in order to make their operations more efficient or larger. There's still a lot of land in the United States waiting to be brought into cultivation, so they expand their operations. They take on all this debt, assuming that farm prices will stay where they are indefinitely or maybe even get higher. But they don't. In the fall of 1918, the war came to an abrupt and somewhat unexpected end, and our government, which had no clue at that point that they even needed to transition the economy back to peacetime, canceled vast contracts for foodstuffs for the military, which was being folded back down to peacetime levels as quickly as they could fill out the paperwork. And over the next 2 or 3 years, European agricultural production returned to normal levels. So farm prices don't just abruptly spike downward. It's more of just a lag year by year. Every year, the crops bring less than they did the year before. So the problems accumulate. And the problem farmers have, the eternal problem of farmers I'm not a fan of regulation, but in an unregulated market, is that they sell in markets controlled by buyers, and they buy in markets controlled by sellers. Plus, unlike the manufacturing sector, no single farmer has anywhere near enough market share to influence the market. So you're a farmer, you still owe this money you borrowed during the war, your payments are coming to you, they don't go down, but your income's going down year by year. It's harder and harder to make the payments on your debt. There's only one thing you can possibly do. And when I ask students about it, they're going to give me creative answers like, well, diversify. That's risky. That can go wrong a whole lot easier than it can go right. But the only thing you can do is the opposite of what would be done in any other sector of the economy. You have to try to produce more in order to get your income back up. Okay, what I mean by what I just said, if car sales slow down, the automakers are going to, lay off a night shift, close an assembly plant or two. They're going to support the price by restricting supply. They can do that. But farmers can't because there's too many of them. You could be the largest volume wheat farmer in the United States, and your market share probably starts with a decimal point followed by some zeros. So there's nothing any one farmer can do. And even if they formed a big organization and tried to work together, there'd be others who are not in and say, okay, you guys just keep the price up. I want to cash in. So that's getting worse and worse now. So farmers, they have to keep going deeper and deeper in debt just to hang on. So these country banks, you've got this little country bank out here, some little podunk town, and there are so many tiny little banks. At the time, the banker is in the same leaky boat as the farmer. The only chance the banker has of coming out of this standing up is if there's a turnaround in prices. So they got to keep betting on these farmers year after year. About 2 million farmers a year just quit. That's on average. About 2 million farmers just quit, walk away, let the bank have the land, go to town, try to get a job. The reason that didn't solve the problem is that the bank is going to auction off the land for whatever they can get for it, because the land was the collateral on the money they lent, and somebody else will get the land, and if it's any good, they will keep it in cultivation. Doesn't solve the problem. If it's not any good, it wasn't part of the problem to begin with. And sometimes the farmers gang up, and there's going to be an auction for some poor farmer's land, and the farmers are all gather up and conspire, and they're going to bid 1 penny or $1 or something like that, and that bank has to take it, and the farmer gets his farm back free and clear. Well, and that's probably going to take out the bank, and a few of those will. Now, there are a couple other, at least one other factor at work here that's unique to that decade. Farmers mechanized their operations. Okay? Through the end of the World War I decade, the decade ending in 1920, farmers, almost all of them, still used horse-drawn equipment. Planters, plows, harvesters, all of that, disc harrows. It's inefficient, and they use horses. Horses are large. Horses get hungry. They eat a lot. So farmers also have to use a good bit of their land, on average, I'm told about 40%, just raising fodder for the draft horses. As of 1920, only one American farmer in 50 owned a tractor. Henry Ford had started building low-priced tractors powered by internal combustion engines in 1916, but in only a few months, those factories had got to be repurposed for producing things for the war. So 1920, things really haven't changed much. There had been big steam-powered tractors around since the 1880s, but only the largest farm operations could possibly afford them. Anyway, between the beginning and end of the 1920s, the average farmer went to town, went to the bank, signed some papers, and bought himself a tractor, going deeper into debt in the process. Now, the tractor revolutionizes how much land he can farm. He can farm a whole lot more land more efficiently. But what does that do to the total holistic picture? As more and more farmers are driving tractors, production goes up and up and up. And what does that do to the price? It makes it go down. So the farmer gets caught in, and if you run into this question on the exam and decide to try to answer it, there's one thing I've got to see there where the farmers are concerned. The farmers find themselves in a cycle of falling prices and overproduction. The more the prices fall, the more pressure the farmer is under to try to increase production to try to get his income back up. You know, when 50 million farmers all do it at the same time, that drives the price down still more. So this is a nasty situation. And then when the depression hits the rest of the economy, things get much worse for the farmers too than they already were. Okay, I'll be doing some numbers later on, and one thing I'll tell you is that as of say 1932, a bushel of wheat would bring less. It would sell for less than it would cost to ship it to market. Okay, so farmers are in trouble now. They, generally speaking, they cannot afford to buy unnecessary manufactured goods. So they're not part of few of them can be part of the mass market that industrialists moving into mass production have to stay solvent. Is this starting to make some sense? Okay. And you know what? I'm not quite through. Do they need the horses anymore? No, they don't. The horses go to wherever horses go when they don't have anything else to do. Figure it out. And the farmer can now sow his entire farm in the money crop. So there's a appreciable increase in land and cultivation just from farmers uh, starting to cultivate their money crops in land previously used to grow fodder for the draft horses. Okay, farmers in trouble. Manufacturing, any idiot could tell farmers are in trouble in the 1920s. Manufacturing, not so much. They seem to be doing okay. There are all these new products, a whole list of big new things that we talked about and under um, um, consumer society. A huge market for cars, radios, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, fans, toasters, whatever it is. And when uh, you know what, I almost got something out of order. Let's just stick with the program here. Manufacturers make the mistake of assuming that this is going to go on forever when it's not. But anyway, it looks healthy, even when it starts to falter. At least by 1927, sales are starting to slow down of these expensive items you'd have to pay out on credit. Inventories are starting to pile up. Construction stalls, housing starts stall, all of that. There are two time bombs, as I put it in the supplement, ticking away behind the scenes, ready to blow up the manufacturing sector. This sounds slightly technical, but one problem was that wage increases, which were significant that decade, but they still did not keep pace with productivity increases. Okay, fine shade of difference. Production and productivity is not the same, or not the same. Production is just the total amount that's produced. Productivity is outputs per unit of input. Okay, so a factory worker works for a day. What on average is he able to produce? Now, the moving assembly line, power tools, that sort of thing, workers are able to produce more and more each worker than they could before. So, but the pay increases and incomes trend up like 30% a decade. That's still not enough. So, in a way, it's simplistic, but in a way, if wages are going up like this and productivity is going up like this, there's going to be a gap there, and that's going to be on sold merchandise. That's very simplistic, but it kind of gives you the idea. So eventually, production is outstripping the ability of the market to consume. So if manufacturers had seen, like Henry Ford did, seen their workers as part of a necessary market and had paid them enough to participate in the market, this whole thing could have been avoided. But they didn't. They still saw labor as an expense to be minimized as much as you could. That's one time bomb. The other is that the productive capacity, the factory system, is moving toward being seriously overbuilt. Okay? Manufacturing companies are extremely profitable during that decade, partly because they're not paying their workers as much as they should out of their own self interest. Profits are what they exist to make, so that's only so far you can go in criticizing that, but some mistakes are made here. These manufacturers not knowing to expect the market to mature, that's a modern term. A market matures when you move past the average buyer being a first-time buyer of some big new thing and into a market where the average buyer is buying a replacement and fewer are buying one for the first time. Sales will slow down and level off. They didn't know to expect that. So they're building these big, glitzy, new, highly efficient factories because they think the market's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger when it isn't. So we'll see the consequences of that in part